The air in the house was the first sign. It didn't smell like home. It smelled of nothing. Not the faint, lingering scent of his late wife's floral perfume, nor the ghost of cookies baked years ago. It was the sterile, oppressive scent of industrial-grade lemon cleaner and cold, empty space. An aroma so potent it felt like a physical presence meant to scour memories from the very drywall. Jacob stood in the entryway, his duffel bag a heavy, alien object on the gleaming hardwood floor. 9 years. 9 years of sand and sun and the constant, low-grade hum of impending violence, and he had returned to this silence, a silence more unnerving than any mortar fire. He had pictured this moment 1,000 times, a reel of fantasy played in the back of a transport or the dark of a barracks. Running through the door, scooping up his daughter, a squeal of laughter, the immediate, erasing warmth of family. The reality was a woman he barely knew, his sister-in-law Caroline, standing with a smile that was perfectly placed but didn't reach her eyes, and a silence that felt curated. And then he saw her, Lily. She stood half-hidden behind Caroline's legs, a ghost in a pink dress. She wasn't the gap-toothed toddler from his last photograph. The one with spaghetti sauce on her chin he'd kept tucked in his helmet liner. She was small for her age, a fragile thing with enormous, watchful eyes that held none of the childish fire he remembered. It was the faint, almost imperceptible discoloration along her delicate jawline that seized the air in his lungs, a pale, yellowish-green shadow, the last vestige of a healing bruise. "She's so clumsy, always bumping into things," Caroline said, her voice a smooth, practiced melody that slid right over the jagged edges of Jacob's sudden, cold dread. "Just yesterday, she took a tumble off the play structure in the garden. Gave us quite a scare. Didn't you, sweetie?" Lily didn't answer. She didn't even look at him. She just pressed herself tighter against Caroline's leg, her small hand clutching the fabric of her aunt's slacks like a lifeline. Jacob felt a chasm open between the man he was supposed to be, the happy, returning father, and the soldier he had become, an expert in threat assessment, a man who recognized the topography of fear in an instant. He saw it in the rigid set of his daughter's shoulders, in the way her gaze was fixed on the floor, in the precise, unnatural stillness of a child who had learned that movement was a risk. He looked from the faint mark on his daughter's face to the polished smile of the woman who was supposed to be protecting her, and the sterile air of the house suddenly felt like it was choking him. The war, he realized with a sickening lurch, wasn't over. He had just walked onto a new battlefield. The internal monologue that had been a constant companion through years of deployment, a stream of logistics, mission parameters, and letters home he never sent, now shifted into a grim, analytical current. He remembered this house as it was. He remembered the scuff marks on the baseboards from Lily's first walker, a constellation of happy accidents he and Sarah had refused to paint over. He remembered the faint crayon mural behind the sofa, a secret masterpiece Lily had created, and the way Sarah had laughed, declaring it a permanent installation. Now the walls were a pristine, unforgiving white. The floors shone with a mirror-like gloss, reflecting a world devoid of life or error. It was less a home and more a showroom, a carefully constructed stage set designed to broadcast an image of flawless, effortless perfection. Where were the toys? The scattered books? The joyful chaos that was the signature of a child's existence? This wasn't just tidiness. It was an erasure. He was cataloging every detail, his mind operating on a protocol it hadn't used on civilian soil. The perfect alignment of the throw pillows, the complete absence of dust on any surface, the way the silence wasn't peaceful but pressurized, as if a single loud noise would shatter the fragile illusion. He thought of the photo, the one he'd almost worn through with his thumb, of Lily laughing, her whole body shaking with glee. That child belonged in a home filled with life. The child standing before him, a silent, trembling effigy, belonged to this cold, sterile museum. The dissonance was a physical blow, a confirmation of the wrongness that had settled in his gut the moment he'd stepped over the threshold. The house itself was a testament to Caroline's control. Every object had its place, curated with a meticulous obsession that felt less like homemaking and more like a form of defense. Sunlight streamed through spotless windows, but it didn't seem to warm the rooms. It only served to illuminate the lack of any personal touch, any sign of spontaneous life. Even the air that drifted in from the open kitchen window, carrying the scent of cut grass from the perfectly manicured lawn, seemed to be filtered and tamed before it could disturb the interior's sterile equilibrium. The scent of lemon polish was a constant, underlying note, a chemical sharpness that scraped at the back of his throat. It was the smell of constant, vigilant cleaning, of erasing any trace of daily living. There were no photographs on the mantelpiece, save for a single, professionally taken shot of Caroline and Lily, both dressed in matching cream-colored sweaters, their smiles identical in their posed vacancy. It wasn't a memory. It was a piece of propaganda. Jacob ran a hand over the smooth, cold marble of the kitchen island, a surface so polished he could see his own grim reflection. This wasn't the heart of the home he remembered. It was the cold, still heart of a mausoleum. That evening, dinner was an exercise in unbearable tension. The table was set with a precision that would have impressed a drill sergeant. The clinking of silverware against the porcelain plates was unnervingly loud in the quiet room. Caroline kept up a steady stream of bright, meaningless chatter about school functions and neighborhood events, crafting a narrative of a perfect, happy life. She served Lily a small, precise portion of chicken and steamed vegetables, everything cut into neat, uniform pieces. "We don't make messes, do we, Lily?" Caroline said, her voice light, but her eyes fixed on the child with an intensity that was anything but casual. It wasn't a question, it was a command. Jacob watched his daughter. Lily ate with a slow, deliberate care that was alien to a child. Each bite was carefully placed in her mouth. Her back was ramrod straight. She held her fork as if it were a delicate, dangerous instrument. Her eyes darted from her plate to Caroline and back again, a constant, flickering check for approval. When a single pea rolled from her fork onto the pristine white tablecloth, Jacob saw her entire body flinch, a barely perceptible tremor of pure terror. Her breath hitched. Before she could even move to retrieve it, Caroline's hand shot out, plucking the errant pea with a napkin. "Oops," Caroline chirped, her smile tightening at the corners. "We must be more careful." The word careful hung in the air, thick with unspoken threat. Jacob felt a cold, hard knot of rage form in his stomach. This wasn't discipline. It was indoctrination. It was the training of a prisoner. He tried to break the spell. "So, Lilypad," he began, using the old nickname he and Sarah had given her. "I brought you something. It's in my bag." From a place with a lot of sand, Lily's eyes flickered toward him for a fraction of a second. A spark of something, curiosity, maybe even memory, before they skittered back to Caroline, seeking permission. "That's lovely, Jacob," Caroline interjected smoothly, cutting off any potential response. "But Lily knows we don't discuss gifts at the dinner table. It's impolite. We can look at it after our chores are done and our lessons are reviewed." She turned her smile back to Lily, a brilliant, terrifying weapon. "Isn't that right?" Lily gave a tiny, jerky nod, her gaze falling back to her plate, the brief spark of connection extinguished. Jacob felt like he was behind reinforced glass, watching his daughter drown and unable to break through. He was a guest in this house, a stranger at this table, and his own child was a captive in a gilded cage, policed by a smiling warden. The meal continued in that strained, suffocating silence, each bite he took feeling like a betrayal, a concession to the monstrous fiction Caroline had constructed around his little girl. He closed his eyes for a moment, the pristine white of the dining room dissolving into a memory, a scene bathed in the warm, honeyed light of a summer afternoon years ago. He was on the floor of their old living room, the one with the worn rug and the crayon marks on the wall. Lily, barely 3 years old, was a whirlwind of motion, her laughter echoing as she tried to help him build a lopsided tower of wooden blocks. She smelled of sunshine and baby shampoo. Her hands, sticky with juice, kept grabbing his, pulling him into her chaotic, joyful world. He remembered her plopping a block sideways on the very top, sending the entire structure crashing down in a clatter of wood on hardwood. He had braced for tears, for a toddler's frustration. Instead, She had thrown her head back and let out a peal of delighted laughter, a pure, unrestrained sound of utter joy at the glorious mess they had made. "Boom!" she had shrieked, clapping her hands. "Do it again, Daddy. Make it go boom." He had looked over at Sarah, who was watching from the armchair, her face soft with love. "She's your daughter, all right," she had said, smiling. "Finds the fun in the wreckage." The memory was so vivid, so full of warmth and sound and life, that opening his eyes again to the cold, silent dining room was a physical shock. The contrast was a blade twisting in his gut. The girl who loved the boom, the child who found joy in chaos, was gone. In her place was this silent, frightened doll, taught that a single pea rolling off her plate was a catastrophe. The question wasn't just what had happened to his daughter. It was who had stolen her. The next day, Jacob began his reconnaissance. He needed an ally, a voice from outside the sterile walls of the house. He remembered Mrs. Gable from next door, a kind, grandmotherly woman who used to give Lily cookies over the fence. He found her tending her roses, her hands covered in dirt, a welcome contrast to the antiseptic world Caroline inhabited. He approached casually, starting with pleasantries about his return. But the moment he mentioned Lily, a shadow passed over Mrs. Gable's face. Her smile became fragile. "It's good to have you back, Jacob," she said, her voice dropping to a near whisper as she glanced nervously toward Caroline's house. "We've worried." The word hung in the air between them, heavy and significant. "She seems quiet," Jacob prompted gently, keeping his voice neutral. Mrs. Gable began snipping at her roses with sudden, fierce concentration, avoiding his eyes. "Quiet doesn't cover it," she finally murmured, her back still to him. At first, after Sarah, Caroline was a godsend. Everything was perfect. The house, the garden, Lily's little dresses. So perfect, she paused, her clippers stilling. "But it's always perfect. Nothing is ever out of place. You never hear a child's tantrum. You never hear a shout of laughter. Just quiet." She turned to him then, her eyes filled with a pained mixture of guilt and fear. "Last summer, I saw Lily trip on the lawn. A little tumble. She didn't cry, Jacob. She scrambled up and started brushing the grass stains off her knees, her little hands shaking, looking at the house, at the window, like she was waiting for a bomb to go off. A child falls, they're supposed to cry for their mother, or their aunt. She just looked terrified of the dirt. Her voice broke on the last word. I wanted to say something, so many times. But Caroline, she can be very charming. She makes you feel like you're the one who's crazy for even thinking it." She looked at him, her gaze pleading. "It's not right, Jacob. That little girl is walking on eggshells." Her testimony, fragmented and fearful as it was the first external piece of concrete. It wasn't just his gut feeling anymore. The perfection was the prison. The silence was the scream. Later that afternoon, while Caroline was on a lengthy phone call in her home office, Jacob saw his chance. Lily was in her room, engaged in her state-sanctioned quiet time. He moved with a practiced stealth he hadn't used in years, slipping into her bedroom. It was as immaculate as the rest of the house. A row of dolls sat on a shelf, their hair perfectly coiffed, their clothes pristine. They hadn't been played with. They were part of the decor. But Jacob's eye was drawn to something out of place. Tucked deep under the bed, almost out of sight, was a shoebox. He slid it out. Inside, there were no toys or treasures. There were just drawings. Dozens of them scribbled on torn scraps of paper. Most were confused, childish squiggles, but one, near the top, made his blood run cold. It was a picture of a small figure, clearly a little girl, standing next to a bathtub. The girl figure was crying, with big, blue, tear-like streaks running down her face. But it was the other figure in the drawing that stopped his breath. It was a larger figure, a woman with a wide, red, smiling mouth that was more of a grimace. The woman was holding something in her hand, a stick-like object covered in angry, brown scribbles, and she was scrubbing the little girl figure with it, scrubbing her so hard that red, angry lines radiated from the child's skin. The drawing was crude, the work of a young child, but the message was utterly, horrifyingly clear. This wasn't a picture of a happy bath time. This was a depiction of an assault. He carefully placed the drawing back in the box, his hands trembling slightly, and slid it back into its hiding place. This was Lily's testimony. Her silent, screaming testimony, hidden away in the dark. He now had the what. He just needed to find the weapon. That evening, he decided to test Caroline. He found her in the living room, reading a magazine, the picture of serene domesticity. "I was just in Lily's room," he said, keeping his tone light. "She has some interesting drawings hidden under her bed." He watched her face. For a nanosecond, the serene mask slipped. Her eyes tightened, a flicker of something sharp and cold, panic or anger, before it was gone, replaced by a patronizing little laugh. "Oh, that," she said, waving a dismissive hand. "Her imagination runs away with her. Her therapist says it's a way of processing her grief about her mother, creating scary stories. We're encouraged to let her express herself, as long as she keeps the mess contained." The lie was so smooth, so plausible. The therapist. Grief. It was the perfect, modern explanation to deflect any concern. She had an answer for everything. She had built a fortress of plausible deniability around herself, and he knew then that a direct accusation would be useless. She would turn it back on him, paint him as the grieving, unstable soldier seeing monsters where there were none. He simply nodded. Right? The therapist. Good to know she's getting that support, but inside, his resolve hardened into something adamantine. She had overplayed her hand. She had revealed that she knew about the drawings. And she had confirmed that she was willing to twist the very concept of psychological care into another weapon, another wall in the prison she'd built around his daughter. He wasn't just fighting an abuser, he was fighting an expert liar. The next day, Jacob knew he had to find the object from the drawing. He needed the physical proof, the instrument of cruelty, that would connect Lily's fear, her bruises, and her hidden art. An opportunity arose when Caroline announced she had a luncheon with her charity committee, an event that would take her out of the house for at least 3 hours. It was a performance, he noted. She made the announcement with a sigh, as if the burden of her perfect social life was almost too much to bear. As soon as her car pulled out of the driveway, his mission began. Lily was watching a nature program, her eyes glued to the screen, a small island of calm in the tense house. "I'm just going to put some laundry away upstairs, Lily Pad," he said softly. She nodded, not looking away from the television. He moved up the stairs, his senses on high alert. He wasn't a father looking through a house. He was an operative clearing a hostile structure. He started with the master bedroom, a space even more sterile than the rest of the house. The bed was made with military precision, the surfaces bare. Nothing. He moved to the ensuite bathroom. It was a symphony in white marble and chrome. Bottles of expensive lotions and soaps were lined up on the counter like soldiers on parade. He opened the vanity. More of the same. Then he saw it. Under the sink, behind the spare rolls of toilet paper, was a plastic caddy. It was the kind used for cleaning supplies, but it didn't hold sprays or sponges. Inside were 3 brushes. They were stiff-bristled, wooden-handled scrubbing brushes, the kind you'd use on a tile floor or a stubborn pot. One of them, he saw with a surge of cold fury, had darker bristles than the others, stained a faint brownish red. And next to the brushes was a large, industrial-sized container of antiseptic soap, the harsh, clinical kind used in hospitals, the kind that would strip the skin raw. The pieces clicked into place with the sickening finality of a cell door locking. The drawing. The faint, yellowish bruises on Lily's jaw and arms, which weren't from falling but from being held down, scrubbed. The way she flinched at the mention of a mess. Caroline wasn't just cleaning the house. She was trying to clean the child. Any perceived imperfection, a grass stain, a spilled pea, maybe even a sad mood she deemed messy, was a stain to be violently scoured away. This wasn't just physical abuse. It was a profound psychological torture, a ritual of purification designed to teach a child that her very nature was dirty, flawed, and in need of painful correction. He stood there in the silent, pristine bathroom, the cold tile beneath his feet, holding the tools of his daughter's torment in his hands. The urge to smash the mirror, to tear the room apart, was a physical force inside him, a wild animal clawing at the inside of his ribs. It was a rage so pure and so potent it threatened to consume him. But he couldn't. He was a soldier, and a soldier doesn't give in to rage. A soldier gathers intelligence, assesses the enemy, and forms a plan of attack. He forced himself to breathe, the air thick with the scent of bleach and Caroline's cloying perfume. He placed the brushes back exactly as he had found them, slid the caddy behind the toilet paper, and closed the cabinet door. He wiped his prints from the chrome handle. He left no trace. He walked out of that bathroom a different man. The grieving father was gone. In his place was a predator, and he had just found the scent of his prey. He would not act on impulse. He would wait. He would plan. And he would dismantle Caroline's perfect world, piece by horrifying piece. The weight of his discovery was a physical burden, a pressure behind his eyes and a coldness in his chest. He now had to exist in the house, share meals with this monster, and pretend that he knew nothing. Every polite smile, every casual question felt like a betrayal of his own daughter. His training kicked in, the discipline of years spent in hostile territory. He had to compartmentalize. The fury was locked in a box, to be opened only when the time was right. His face became a neutral mask, his voice calm and steady. He was operating behind enemy lines, and the mission was singular: extract the hostage. The first step was to call in reinforcements. He couldn't do this alone, not through official channels that would get bogged down in bureaucracy and give Caroline time to react. He needed his own intelligence network. He called Marcus, a man from his old unit who had left the service and now ran a private security and investigations firm. The call was short and coded, using language they had developed overseas. "I've got a situation here, a domestic," Jacob said, standing in the backyard to ensure he wasn't overheard. "A high-value asset in a compromised position. I need a full workup on the primary guardian. Everything. Sealed records, financials, the works. Expedited." There was no hesitation on the other end. "Understood," Marcus replied. "Consider it done. I'll be your eye in the sky. Feed me intel, I'll give you a clearer picture of the battlefield. Stay safe." The simple affirmation was a lifeline. He wasn't alone anymore. He had an ally. The next day, Caroline decided they should have a family outing to a local botanical garden. It was a strategic move on her part, a public display of their happy, healing family. For Jacob, it was hours of agonizing performance. He walked beside her on the manicured paths, listening to her prattle on about the names of flowers, all while he was acutely aware of Lily, a small, silent figure walking a few paces ahead. He watched Caroline put a hand on Lily's shoulder to guide her, and saw his daughter's muscles tense, a reaction so subtle no one else would have noticed. He had to force himself to make small talk, to nod and smile, while inside he was replaying the image of the scrubbing brushes, the drawing of the crying girl. At one point, Lily pointed a tentative finger at a bright blue butterfly that had landed on a leaf. A flicker of genuine wonder crossed her face, a ghost of the child she was supposed to be. "It's pretty," she whispered, her voice barely audible. Caroline immediately stepped in. "Don't touch it, Lily," she said, her voice dripping with false sweetness. "You'll get germs on your hands, and your dress will get smudged." The wonder on Lily's face vanished, replaced by the familiar, practiced obedience. The butterfly flew away. The moment was gone, murdered by a sterile command. Jacob felt the rage in its box, rattling the lock. He clenched his fists in his pockets, his knuckles white. "Patience," he told himself. "Every observation is ammunition. Every smile she fakes is another charge to be laid against her." Later that evening, the breakthrough came not from a phone call or a secret file, but from Lily herself. Jacob was sitting in the living room, ostensibly reading a book, while Lily sat on the floor, arranging her perfect, unplayed with dolls into a silent, orderly row. Caroline was in the kitchen, the sound of her humming mixing with the clatter of dishes being put away. Jacob didn't look at Lily directly, but spoke to the room. "I saw a picture of your mom today," he said quietly. She was laughing. She had the best laugh he felt. More than saw Lily stiffen. She stopped moving the dolls. The house was quiet for a long moment, the only sound the ticking of the grandfather clock in the hall. Then, so softly he almost thought he'd imagined it, a tiny voice spoke from the floor. "Aunt Caroline says Mommy was messy." Jacob kept his eyes on his book, his heart pounding. "Messy? How?" Another long pause. Lily's voice was a thread of sound, a whisper of pure misery that cut through him like a razor. "She says that's why she got sick. The stains. She says we have to be clean so we don't get sick." He felt the air leave his lungs. And then, the final, devastating sentence, the key to the entire twisted pathology. "The stains won't come out." It wasn't about grass stains or spilled juice. Caroline had weaponized his wife's death. She had taken the tragedy of a disease and twisted it into a morality tale about cleanliness, about purity. She was scrubbing Lily not just to punish her for being a child, but in a demented attempt to scour away the imagined stain of her mother's genetics, her mother's memory, her mother's very existence. Jacob didn't respond. He couldn't. He just sat there, the book heavy in his hands, as the full, monstrous scope of Caroline's cruelty was laid bare by the whispered words of her smallest victim. The report from Marcus arrived the next morning as a password-protected file in Jacob's email. He opened it in the privacy of the guest room, his back against the locked door. The information cascaded onto the screen, and with each line, the portrait of Caroline sharpened from a cruel guardian into something far more broken and dangerous. It was all there. A childhood spent in a house run by a mother with a severe, undiagnosed obsessive-compulsive disorder. Police had been called to the residence twice for domestic disturbances, both times involving the mother's frantic, hysterical attempts to decontaminate a teenage Caroline after she'd come home from a party. Then came the sealed juvenile record. At 16, Caroline had been accused of stalking and harassing a former friend who had betrayed her. The details were chilling. Obsessive calls, letters detailing the friend's unclean habits, and a final incident where Caroline broke into the friend's home, not to steal anything, but to throw out all her makeup and clothes, replacing them with antiseptic wipes. It wasn't malice in the traditional sense. It was pathology. She wasn't just cruel. She was reenacting her own trauma, projecting her mother's sickness onto Lily. She saw any sign of Lily's individuality, her connection to Sarah, her childish messiness, as a contaminant that had to be eradicated. The puzzle was complete. Jacob now understood the enemy, not just what she was doing, but why. As he absorbed the grim details of Caroline's past, a memory of his own failure surfaced, raw and sharp. It was the day he'd left. He remembered standing in this very hallway, his deployment orders in hand. Sarah had just been gone a few months, and the house was shrouded in grief. Lily, too young to understand, had clung to his leg, crying because he was wearing his leaving boots. He remembered Caroline arriving, all calm efficiency, promising to take care of everything. "She needs stability, Jacob," she had said. "Not a grieving father who's half a world away. Let me do this. Go serve. Come back when you're whole." And he had listened. He had convinced himself it was the noble thing to do, the selfless choice. He told himself he was too broken to be a father, that his grief was a contagion he had to protect Lily from. But as he stood there in the guest room, the truth hit him with the force of a physical blow. It wasn't nobility. It was cowardice. He had run. He had run from the mess of his own heart, from the overwhelming responsibility of raising a child alone. He had outsourced his fatherhood, handed his daughter over to the first person who offered a simple solution. And this was the price of his retreat. His past failure wasn't a mistake in combat. It was a mistake of the heart, and it had left his daughter undefended on the most important battlefield of all. That afternoon, Caroline's tightly controlled world began to show cracks under the pressure of his presence. She felt his scrutiny, the quiet judgment behind his eyes, and it was making her unravel. The mistake came, as it often does, over something small. At lunch, Lily was drinking a glass of water and her hand slipped, sending a small amount sloshing over the rim onto the polished wood of the table. It was a tiny spill, no more than a spoonful, but to Caroline it was a catastrophic breach of containment. Her mask didn't just slip, it shattered. "Look what you did!" she shrieked, her voice high and shrill, all the practiced sweetness gone, replaced by a raw, ugly fury. "You careless, messy little thing. Always making messes." She grabbed a napkin and began scrubbing at the spot with a frantic, violent energy, her knuckles white. Lily had frozen in her chair, her face pale, her body rigid with terror. She looked exactly like the crying girl in her drawing. And in that moment, Jacob saw it all. The years of terror, the constant fear, the ritualistic punishments, all laid bare in one uncontrolled outburst over a drop of water. Caroline, realizing what she had done, caught her breath. She looked up and saw Jacob watching her, his face a mask of cold, quiet fury. Her anger collapsed into a flustered panic. She could have ruined the finish, she stammered, trying to reconstruct the facade. But it was too late. He had seen the monster, and now he had everything he needed to expose it. The plan formed in his mind, clear and precise as a military operation. The time for patience was over. The time for action was now. The next day was the day of the reckoning. The plan was simple, relying not on force, but on the precise application of psychological pressure. Jacob knew Caroline's greatest fear was the destruction of her public image, the shattering of the illusion of perfection she had so carefully constructed. He needed a witness. He called Mrs. Gable that morning. "I need you to be in your front garden at 3 o'clock, he said, his voice leaving no room for argument. "Just be there. Please." He could hear the fear in her voice, but she agreed. At 3 o'clock, he found Caroline on the front porch, enjoying the afternoon sun. He brought 2 glasses of iced tea, a picture of domestic peace. Lily was inside, in her room for her scheduled quiet time. "Caroline," he began, his voice calm, "I've been thinking a lot about family. About your family." He saw her stiffen slightly. Across the lawn, he saw Mrs. Gable appear, pretending to deadhead her petunias, a silent, nervous ally. "Marcus, my friend, the one who does research for me, he found some old public records from your hometown. It's amazing what you can find. He told me about your mother, about how much she struggled with cleanliness." Caroline's smile froze on her face. Her knuckles, wrapped around her glass, were white. "I don't know what you're talking about," she said, her voice thin. "And he found a sealed juvenile file," Jacob continued, his voice dropping, relentless, "about a friend of yours. A girl you thought was unclean. You broke into her house, didn't you? To help her." Caroline shot to her feet, the iced tea sloshing in her glass. "How dare you?" she hissed, her eyes blazing with a mixture of fury and raw panic. "You have no right to dig into my past. I have created a perfect, safe, clean life for that little girl. Is that what you call it?" Jacob asked, his voice lethally soft. "Safe? Clean?" He reached into his back pocket and pulled out the drawing he had retrieved from Lily's room. He unfolded it and placed it on the small table between them. The crude, crayon image of the crying girl, the smiling woman, the scrubbing brush. It lay there in the bright afternoon sun, an irrefutable accusation. Caroline stared at the drawing, and for a moment, all the air seemed to leave her body. The facade didn't just crack, it exploded. "She drew that," she whispered, her voice trembling. And then, something inside her broke completely. The panic turned to a wild, unhinged rage. "She is a filthy, messy, ungrateful child," she shrieked, her voice echoing across the manicured lawns of the quiet street. Mrs. Gable looked up from her flowers, her face a mask of horror. "I have worked my fingers to the bone to keep her clean, to keep her from turning out like her mother, weak and messy and sick. But the stain is always there. You can never scrub it all away." Her confession, hysterical and self-incriminating, hung in the quiet suburban air. At that moment, the front door opened. Lily stood there, drawn by the shouting. She saw her aunt, her face twisted in an ugly mask of fury. She saw her father, standing calm and solid. And for the first time, she saw the monster for what it was, powerless, pathetic, and defeated. She took a hesitant step, then another, and then she walked across the porch and took her father's hand. It was a small, silent act, but it was a declaration of allegiance, a choice. It was the end of the war. As if on cue, a dark sedan pulled up to the curb. Two people got out, a man in a suit and a woman with a kind, serious face. They were from Child Protective Services. A second car, a patrol car, pulled up behind them. Marcus had done his job. The call had been prearranged, timed to the confrontation. Caroline's hysterical tirade faltered as she saw them approach, her face collapsing from rage into disbelief, then into a dawning, animal terror. The game was over. Mrs. Gable, her face streaked with tears of relief and horror, walked quickly across the lawn, no longer afraid. "I saw it," she said to the woman from CPS, her voice shaking but firm. "I heard it all. For years, I've heard the silence from this house, and it was deafening. But I just heard the truth." The authorities moved with a calm, methodical efficiency that was in stark contrast to Caroline's ragged breakdown. The woman knelt to speak to Lily in a low, gentle voice, while the man began questioning Jacob, who handed him the drawing. The police officers stood by, silent sentinels of the new reality. Caroline was babbling now, trying to piece her narrative of perfection back together. But the words were hollow, nonsensical. She tried to explain the brushes, for the grout in the bathroom, and the bruises. She's so clumsy. But her credibility had been incinerated by her own public confession. The CPS worker, a woman named Maria, spent a long time speaking with Mrs. Gable, who poured out years of suppressed anxiety and suspicion. She talked about the lack of laughter, the perfectly clean dresses that never seemed to be played in, and the incident with the grass stains, her voice growing stronger with every validating nod from Maria. Inside the house, a uniformed officer, guided by Jacob, retrieved the plastic caddy from under Caroline's bathroom sink. The stiff-bristled brushes were placed in evidence bags, the industrial soap documented. Each piece of evidence was another nail in the coffin of Caroline's fabricated world. Jacob watched as she was finally escorted to the patrol car. The perfect neighbor, the flawless hostess, the sainted guardian, was gone. In her place was a distraught, disheveled woman, her face pale, her mask of control utterly gone, revealing the terrified, pathological child she had always been underneath. As the car pulled away, a profound quiet settled over the house. But this time, it wasn't the silence of oppression. It was the silence of peace, the silence of a battle won. Jacob looked down at Lily, who was still holding his hand, her small fingers wrapped tightly around his. He squeezed back gently. The rescue was complete. The hours that followed were a blur of procedural necessity. Statements were given, paperwork was signed. Jacob, using the power of Attorney Sarah had granted him years ago, was given immediate emergency custody of Lily. The house, now a crime scene, was no longer a home. As evening fell, Maria from CPS gave him a soft, weary smile. "You can take her now," she said. Jacob walked back into the house one last time, into Lily's pristine, lonely bedroom. She had fallen asleep on the bed, exhausted by the day's emotional torrent. He looked around the sterile room at the dolls that were never played with, at the books that were never read. He gently scooped his daughter into his arms. She was so light. He carried her out of the house, across the porch where the facade had shattered, and didn't look back. He was leaving the mausoleum for the last time, and he was carrying its most precious artifact with him. Their first night of freedom was spent in the anonymous quiet of a hotel room. He ordered pizza, a food he was sure Lily hadn't been allowed to eat. She picked at a slice, her eyes wide with a mixture of excitement and fear, as if she were breaking a sacred rule. He didn't push her to eat more. He just let her be. He set up a pillow and a blanket for her on the sofa, but in the middle of the night, a small, choked cry woke him from a light sleep. He found her sitting bolt upright, her body trembling, her face slick with tears from a nightmare she couldn't articulate. He didn't say anything. He just picked her up, carried her to his bed, and held her. She burrowed against his chest, her small body finally relaxing into a deep, peaceful sleep. He lay awake for the rest of the night, watching the rise and fall of her chest, the weight of her in his arms both a profound comfort and a terrifying responsibility. The legal and psychological consequences for Caroline were clinical and swift. Faced with the evidence, the witnesses, and her own confession, she was charged. A court-ordered psychiatric evaluation revealed the depth of her trauma-induced disorders. She was deemed unfit to stand trial in a conventional sense and was committed to a secure psychiatric facility. There would be no dramatic courtroom showdown, just the quiet, administrative process of justice. Jacob felt no triumph, only a deep, weary sadness for the broken woman who had inflicted her own brokenness on his child. But his focus was not on the past. It was on the small girl sleeping beside him. He thought about the future, a vast, unknown territory. He was no longer just a soldier. He was a father. A full-time, single father to a daughter he barely knew. A daughter who had been taught that the very essence of her being was a stain to be removed. The fear was immense, a cold dread that coiled in his stomach. What if he failed? What if he couldn't undo the damage? He had run from this responsibility once before, and the consequences had been catastrophic. This time there was no retreat. He looked down at Lily's sleeping face, her features peaceful in the dim light from the hotel window. He made a silent vow, a promise to her, to Sarah, to himself. He would not run again. He would learn to be a father. He would be patient, he would be present, and he would spend the rest of his life showing this little girl that it was okay to be messy, to be loud, to be sad, to be happy, to be gloriously, imperfectly, wonderfully alive. His mission had changed. The objective was no longer to fight an enemy, but to heal a child. A year later, the silence in their small, rented apartment was a different kind altogether. It was a comfortable quiet, punctuated by the sound of pages turning, the hum of the refrigerator, and, most miraculously, the sound of laughter. Their home was not perfect. There were dust bunnies under the sofa, a stack of mail on the counter, and a colorful, chaotic galaxy of Lily's paintings held to the refrigerator by mismatched magnets. It was beautifully, wonderfully messy. Jacob was in the kitchen making lunch when a flash of color caught his eye. Lily, now 10 years old and a foot taller, was sitting at the small dining table, her hands, arms, and even a smudge on her cheek covered in bright blue finger paint. She was creating a swirling, vibrant masterpiece, a look of intense concentration and pure joy on her face. A year ago, the sight of such a mess would have sent her into a panic. Now, she looked up at him and grinned, holding up her paint-covered hands. "I'm making a sky for a superhero," she declared. "He's a messy superhero." Jacob felt a warmth spread through his chest, a feeling so profound it almost buckled his knees. That evening, as they were washing the dinner dishes together, Lily splashed a bit of soapy water on the floor. She froze for a heartbeat, a flicker of the old fear passing through her eyes. It was a ghost, a remnant of the past that still visited sometimes. Jacob stopped what he was doing, dipped his hand in the water, and gently flicked a spray of bubbles at her. She blinked, shocked. Then, a slow smile spread across her face. She giggled and splashed him back. Soon they were engaged in a full-blown water fight, the floor soaked, both of them laughing until their sides hurt. Later, tucked into bed, he read to her from her favorite book. She leaned against him, her head on his shoulder, her breathing slow and even. "Daddy?" she said, her voice sleepy. "Yeah, Lilypad? I'm glad you came home," she whispered. He pulled the blanket up to her chin, his heart full. "Me too," he said, his voice thick with emotion. Me too. He had returned from one war only to find another. But this was a war he had won not with weapons, but with patience, with presence, and with love. He had found his daughter, and in saving her, he had finally saved himself. The walls we build around our children are meant to protect them. But what happens when the protector is the monster? We see the perfect houses, the smiling faces, the well-behaved children, and we assume all is well. We are taught not to interfere, not to question, not to look too closely at the cracks in the facade. But how many children are living in silent terror behind those perfect walls? Their screams unheard because they are taught that silence is safety. What is our responsibility, as neighbors, as friends, as fellow human beings, to see past the performance and recognize the quiet plea for help in a child's eyes? When does our polite deference become complicity in a crime we cannot see? Perhaps the bravest act is not to fight wars in distant lands, but to find the courage to knock on a neighbor's door and simply ask, "Is everything all right?" If this story has touched you, if it has made you think about the hidden battles being fought all around us, we invite you to share your own thoughts and experiences in the comments below.